The Honourable David Parker.
Mr Chairman, can I first state my agreement with the Minister and the Chair in respect of his comments about the effect of the ETS on power prices. I agree with him that the ETS has not been responsible for all of the power price increases that we have seen. We know that partly because, at least in theory, the electricity price is driven by the long-run marginal cost of new supply. The long-run cost of new supply in the electricity system has long foreseen the cost of carbon coming. And indeed, when I was Minister some years ago, Contact Energy told me that they were already factored into their investment decisions and indeed into their share price was the effect of the cost of carbon on electricity prices. So I agree with the Minister that the increases of late that have been blamed on the emissions trading scheme, although they are partly a consequence of that, they're partly not. And of course that begs the question, if it's not all related to the ETS, what is it? What is it? Well, the answer to that is perhaps that there is insufficient competition. Now, the purpose of this legislation is set out in Clause 4 to be, the purpose of this Act is to provide a framework for the regulation of the electricity industry. And the reason that you need a framework for regulation of the electricity industry compared with other goods and services that are supplied, particularly when it comes to the way in which electricity is delivered, is that the market has severe constraints. And it's arguable that it's not competitive enough. And that's why the government intervenes and therefore regulates the market to try and enhance competition. And the question you have to ask in New Zealand is whether after these years since we've had these so-called market reforms that were pushed upon the country by Max Bradford originally, is whether there is sufficient competition to justify competition being the control on price. Because if there is insufficient competition to control price, then you have to give up on the competitive market as being the appropriate way to control price, because it is a fiction. And what lies behind that fiction is excessive pricing. Now, we've heard from Claire Curran about the example she gave in Dunedin. Can I say, before I move to that, one thing that the Minister ignores in respect of the prior decade was that the major driver of increase in electricity prices in New Zealand was actually Maui gas running out. Maui gas was subject to a price control that went back to the Muldoon government, and as the gas ran out there was a need to remove the cap on the price of gas so as to encourage more exploration, and that was actually the main driver of price in the early to mid 2000s. It doesn't explain increases in price since that date, and there are real questions that remain as to whether the market is sufficiently competitive. What's driving the government's behaviour now is, of course, they've got a desire for SOE dividends. They're not interested in real competition in here. They're not interested in real price controls on an appropriate price of electricity. What they want is dividends and capital advances from the SOEs to the government coffers. And we know that because they've been open about that. They said that one of the things they wanted to have from the SOEs was an improved financial performance. Well, the only way you can get any significant change in the financial return from the major electricity SOEs is to put your price up. And if you put your price up, you make a higher profit, and you therefore can pay a higher dividend to the government. So please don't pretend that it's anything else than that. In respect of the question as to whether there is proper competition, well, I'm just about ready to conclude that there's not. No one can explain the enormous differential between industrial and residential tariffs in New Zealand. It's higher than I know anywhere else in the world. There's an enormous difference, and I think that is very good evidence that there is not sufficient competition at wholesale and retail in residential markets. Mr. Chairman, I'll give you another example of where this is bad. Alexandra sits next to one of the biggest hydro facilities in New Zealand, the Contact Energy Dam on the Clyde River. Alexandra pays one of the highest electricity costs at, what did I say? Clyde River, sorry, the Clutha River. You're quite right, Jackie Dean. I meant the Clutha River. At Clyde, the Clyde Dam sits on the Clutha River. Despite that, the people of Alexandra pay a far higher price for their energy than just about anywhere else in the country. I'm not talking about line charges, I'm talking about their energy charges. This is next to the cheapest And just down the road is the Roxburgh resource, and yet they pay a higher price. This legislation will not change that at all.